to my presentation where I will provide an introduction to fluency. So what is fluency? Specific to reading, it's a multifaceted sub-skill of reading, which is made up of accuracy, rate, and prosody, which I'll go into more in the next slide. Reading fluency is often considered a bridge between decoding and comprehension, and can be influenced by many factors. So these three components of fluency are really important, and I'll kind of walk through each to give you a better sense of how we determine which from which. So accuracy would be the ability to decode words correctly. So this requires readers, to have a deep understanding of the alphabetic principle, how to blend letters into words, and learners must have a knowledge of sight words, both regular and irregular. Prosody includes the rhythmic aspects of reading, tonal or intonation aspects of speech. This would be things like pitch, stress patterns, duration of speech while reading, so how long it takes to say a word or a phrase. And this is also pertaining to chunking and adhering to just general syntax to convey meaning while reading. Rate is pretty simple. It's just how quickly and accurately one reads connected text. So rate wouldn't pertain necessarily to, with regard to fluency, like a list of words. It would have to be connected text. This is usually measured by words read correctly per minute, or WCPM, and there must be automaticity. So it must be quick and fluid. Why does fluency matter? So slow or halting reading can negatively impact interpretation of meaning. If learners are too busy trying to decode words, then they're not kind of freeing up that cognitive space for any sort of meaning. Improved fluency results in more vocabulary growth, just overall motivation and engagement for reading, and it further develops speed and accuracy. The more you do it, the better you get. And overall just gives a deeper understanding of text when you can read in a fluent way. Fluent reading, again, allows readers to free up that cognitive space to truly understand what texts are talking about, and then kind of giving readers the opportunity to connect to content or higher order skills. Assessment is really important with regard to fluency. Fluency has a high impact on reading comprehension and development of further reading automaticity. So it should be screened and it should be assessed often and used to guide instruction. Progress monitoring should be quick, easy, consistent, and meaningful. Fluency screeners should begin as early as grade 1, and progress monitoring should really continue until grade 8. You're really going to continue to monitor the fluency rates of learners all the way up until they reach high school. One common way to assess oral reading fluency is a curriculum-based measurement. So that's just an assessment tool that you can use. You provide students with a unfamiliar grade level text and kind of time them and record errors and intonation and prosody and things of that nature. The prosody assessment rating scale is another. The core fluency assessments, the DIBELS, of course, and the Ames Web reading curriculum-based measurement are other common assessments and progress monitoring tools. So what would maybe potentially cause a disfluent reading in students? There are three kind of big categories that could contribute to disfluent reading. So if a student or a learner was reading slowly, you may ask if they're able to decode, or if they're still kind of isolating those sound by sound and not blending words while they're reading. If students can't decode on the first try, maybe they have to repeat a word a few times before they can blend the whole word. Really, overall, you would just ask if a student lacks automaticity with word identification, If they have strong background knowledge, like if they have had exposure to words or concepts before, and if they are trading speed for accuracy. So if they're reading slowly, maybe they're trying really hard to decode accurately, so they're losing the speed. Prosody related causes could potentially be a student who lacks expression while reading, or they focus more on the word identification than the tone or the rhythm or cadence. Potentially, a student could be ignoring punctuation, those periods and commas, or ignoring phrase boundaries, or they could just lack syntactic knowledge to understand where and how they should be pausing or emphasizing while they're reading. Another potential cause for disfluent reading is the reading just inaccurate? Does the student have insufficient phonics knowledge and skills, right? Are they not quite up to par with their decoding where they should be? Can they recognize high frequency irregular words on sight, right? If they can't do that, then maybe that's where the breakdown is, and that's causing some disfluent reading. Potentially having an underdeveloped oral vocabulary, and just overall can't self-monitor their own reading accuracy, so they're not sure when they're decoding incorrectly or misreading words. So fluency as it pertains to multilingual learners. So this is an important area to consider when teaching multilingual learners any sort of reading instruction, because typically if a multilingual learner could have really strong decoding skills, it might not translate to comprehension because they may still be missing that vocabulary, background knowledge, or they're just really trying so hard to decode and learn that second language that the fluency sounds fluid, right? The rate and the automaticity may be strong, but it doesn't translate to strong comprehension. So to support our multilingual learners, we should definitely focus on expanding that vocabulary and background knowledge, and give opportunities for students to hear the text being read to them, so then they can just focus on the meaning and the vocabulary and the content while hearing, fluent reading, but they're not necessarily having to hyper focus on just the decoding piece of a second language. So these would be some common and effective examples of fluency instruction. So you have independent silent reading, which is a great tool to just gain automaticity, gain exposure to vocabulary, just get that repetition of reading. Any assisted or partner reading, this could be done with teachers or peers or parents or caregivers at home, and definitely repeated oral reading. So anytime students can get multiple exposures to the same word kind of over and over, just like to solidify their knowledge of that word and how it sounds and what it means and the different contexts that it can be used. Timed oral reading is just a great way for students to practice that automaticity, their rate, and reading accurately and quickly. And then throughout all of these, kind of just modeling, right? The more they hear fluent reading, the more likely that they're going to be able to emulate that and do it themselves. This would be an example of, scope and sequence with regard to fluency instruction. So you're really starting in kindergarten with the letter naming and the sound spelling fluency, continuing into grade 1, and then it kind of builds into grade 2 with regard to word reading automaticity. So both regular and irregular words, kind of just getting that exposure and repetition and repeated word reading. And then as students get older, you're going to add the multisyllabic word reading to get that nice automaticity there. And then shifting gears and thinking about reading decodable texts. You really want to start that in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, focusing on those phonics skills and getting a lot of chances for repetition and practice in their reading. And then grades 1, 2, 3 through 5, we're going to focus on the prosody, right? The phrasing, the expressiveness, the tone, the cadence, the rhythm, paying attention to punctuation, kind of more focused on how our reading sounds and what meaning we're trying to pull from reading instead of just decoding. Similarly, reading connected text. So now you're really kind of reading to learn and reading to pull out ideas and concepts and content. And then throughout K through, all the way up until 8th grade, you really want to model, right? So modeling fluent reading, teachers are going to be modeling and leading the way for students to kind of understand how we should be reading and what our tone and cadence and speed should be. And then again, throughout K through all the way up until 8th grade, independent silent reading, and hopefully, beyond into adulthood for that one. So we have a practice activity today. This is going to be a phrase cued reading activity. So as a teacher, I would talk to students about how, where we're pausing in our reading is going to either help or harm our ability to get any sort of meaning from that passage. So first we would kind of do a practice with how not to read a text, and the students would be able to have a chance to kind of get silly and think about, why wouldn't I pause here? Or why does this sound silly? Where should I have paused, right? So I would say to them, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty. Dumpty had a great fall. All the kings, horses and all, the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So the students would be able to, they probably would be familiar with this nursery rhyme, and they would be able to say, that's not how you read it, and kind of brainstorm with the teacher better areas to pause in order for the poem or the nursery rhyme to make sense. So then we would probably do it together. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And throughout the example, we would kind of talk about like a big pause versus a small pause, right? Like those big pauses would come at the end of a full thought or a sentence, and small pauses are kind of in between the big thoughts to help, convey emphasis or, whatever the author's intent is. And then we would obviously give them a chance to practice on their own and maybe do some of the silly ones first to kind of have fun and get some engagement up, and then go through maybe with partners or as a whole group to correctly do the phase cued reading with the nursery rhyme. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. I hope that you learned something about fluency instruction as it relates to reading. There are a few next steps, so just reflect on current practice and determine whether there's room for more fluency instruction. There probably is, because this is a super important sub-skill of reading that we should be continuously working on up until, the high school year. And then another step would be to identify and observe a colleague who's incorporating it really well, and just think about how you can pull some of that expertise into your own practice. The exit ticket is linked here, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.